Okay, I now want to return to the US. It might only be Donald Trump's second day in office, but already shockwaves through the establishment. Plenty to cover. So joining me now, foreign editor at The Australian, Greg Sheridan. Greg, welcome. This is sort of like grand final week for you in US politics. You've got an Australian election coming up. You've got it all going on. You've written today in your paper, The Australian, Trump is bigger, he's bolder, he's brassier than ever before. You say he's speaking for the plain American and for the sometimes forgotten majority, that he's an action man, impatient to get going. So I say to you, I think that's what the world needs right now, isn't it?
Well, Peter, great to be with you. I think that is right. You know, Trump is always going to be a mixed grill. There are going to be some gargoyles in his circle. There are going to be some weird things he says and some weird things he does. But listening to his many speeches on Inauguration Day, first of all, what a contrast to Joe Biden, who could barely walk onto a stage, couldn't read the teleprompter properly. There was Trump signing executive orders as he was talking to the journalists and so on. He's 78 years old, he went to about 100 events. So you've got to admire his stamina and energy. This is unlike any second term we've ever seen before. Second terms are normally an administration kind of slightly winding down. Well, this is much more energetic and focused than his first term. And listening to all his speeches yesterday, a great deal of what he said, maybe 70% of what he said, represented good common sense. So he says, okay, I don't want any more diversity, equity and inclusion. I want a colourblind, merit-based society. Well, who could disagree with that? He says, I don't want any more illegal immigration over the southern border. And he actually said, I am in favour of legal immigration. I want companies, investment and skilled workers to come in, but I'm against illegal immigration. Well, who could disagree with that? And on energy, he said, we're not going to handicap the American economy. We're going to use all the energy sources we've got. And I think a huge number of Americans would have agreed with that. So populism can be good or it can be bad, but when it's well managed, it is the wisdom of ordinary common sense against what has become the madness of the American elites.
All right, just on energy, drill baby drill, he couldn't have been clearer with his intent. He couldn't have been more consistent throughout his campaign. He's already pulled the US out of the Paris Agreement. That was one of his early executive orders. He's upending that climate club. What's this mean for places like Australia?
Well, I think this completely revolutionises the politics and economics of global climate change. The Albanese government's energy policy, like its defence policy, is essentially a farce inside a fantasy wrapped in a kind of episode of madness. The Albanese government will say to you now that all but 4 countries in the world have signed up to the Paris Accords. But the biggest, most powerful economy, developed economy in the world, the United States, has just definitively left the Paris Accords. And it was interesting, Kamala Harris did not campaign on climate change one bit. She reversed herself, she was pro-fracking and so on. I mean, that cause has been lost in the United States. Now then, the other big emitters are not developed countries. They are China and India and Indonesia. These are the big emitters and the growing emitters. Now, technically, they are part of the Paris Accord, but the Paris Accord imposes no obligations on them, and they are all using every energy source they've got. China is building coal-fired power stations at a rate of knots. India is burning more coal than ever before. So is Indonesia, so is the Philippines, so is Bangladesh. So the whole world, the only bit of the world that is going into the climate madness really is Western Europe and previously the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and 1 or 2 East Asian, maybe kind of Japan halfway. And the story is all the European governments have been falling because of high inflation and energy costs. I mean, climate change energy action has done more damage to the German auto industry than the Royal Air Force ever imagined doing in World War II. And as a result, the German government has fallen apart. So this, I think, is a complete revolutionary change. Now, you're not going to hear this on the ABC, you're not going to read it in the Sydney Morning Herald or the Age, but this is a reality which the Albanese government is trying to deny. And Trump, he is changing the reality.
Oh, that's nice. The Prime Minister on climate change is a denier. Hey, defence too. He's made it unambiguously clear he wants other nations to lift their spending, pull their weight. Australia too. It's had an early response from President Macron. He's telling the other NATO members they've got to up their spending. How's that going to play out here? And also, how's he going to respond, particularly to China?
Well, Australia has really been pursuing the bludgers option in defence for a long time, for a very long time. We send tiny numbers of very specialised forces into American operations like the SAS in Afghanistan, and we proclaim loudly our commitment to the alliance. Meanwhile, we do nothing of consequence for our own defence. In the life of the Albanese government, our defence budget has not yet reached 2% of GDP. And of course, no country in the world spends its defence dollar as inefficiently or insanely as Australia does. We still have no maritime armed drones. However, I think probably we'll get something of a free pass from the Americans for two reasons. One is, the one thing we offer is our geography. So the only sort of sensible defence policy the Albanese government has pursued has been to entice American forces into northern Australia. That's the old Australian syndrome. We're not going to defend ourselves. We hope the Americans will defend us. Psychologically, we're the Afghan government, before the fall of Kabul. And the second reason, so that's one reason the Americans give us a free pass. The second reason is that we do everything we can politically to support the alliance and to say how much we love the alliance and everything. And that the Americans think that has a marginal benefit in signalling to Beijing and other players that it can still mobilise alliances. And just very quickly, how is Trump going to respond to China? Actually, we really don't know. He's very, very tough-minded, but his cabinet consists of people with very contradictory views on China. Marco Rubio is a real hawk. The Treasury Secretary is a guy who wants to do conventional multilateral stuff with China. Trump threatened tariffs on China, but he's not imposing them yet. He wants to make a visit there. He's going to save TikTok. I think all that's a little bit strange in a way. I wish he had just let the ban on TikTok go forward. Trump is a deal maker. So as I say, he's a mixed grill. He's good and bad. He's not going to allow China to humiliate America, and he's not going to let China have a free pass, and he is going to compete on artificial intelligence and everything else. But, he could make a deal which is not a great deal. We just, like the rest of the world, we're just going to have to see, and we need to be in his ear all the time. We need to be his best friend as far as we can be, giving him advice about American interests in the Indo-Pacific and all the rest. He'll have a lot of other folks giving him the same advice, the Indians, the Japanese, and so on. Not wrong, Greg. And his first term was pretty good. So, there's reason to be hopeful, right, but it's going to be a bit of a hold your breath.
It'll be a wild ride. And as of Monday, it's no longer politics as usual, at least for the next 4 years. Thanks, Greg. Thank you.